we speak about the objective of creation. The world was not created perfectly. And in the context of that it is perfect, it's deficient. But he says deficiency is not a negative. You have a person with 100 IQ, although you have someone with a 200 IQ. Although 100 is not 200, but within the context of 100, it functions fine as 100. And not, what about if the 100 IQ, the person's able to advance himself to achieve 200? Then definitely it's not. It's only at this moment, he hasn't yet achieved what he could achieve to a greater degree. So that deficiency or that level of less than more is not a negative. Firstly, if it's meant to function in that capacity, that's its capacity, or especially if you're able to advance it beyond that level, definitely deficiency is not, especially if the advancement is accredited to the one who advances and fills in the void, the vacuum of that deficiency. The world was created deficient. It's not perfect. It's for man to complete, to fill in that void, that vacuum, to achieve a level of perfection. What's perfection? Perfection is everything's relative. I always say, we speak about objectivity. You say, this man, there's no one who's as objective as he is. Is he objective on an absolute level? The answer is no, impossible. As a human being, what are we? We're at some total of all our experiences in life, and those experiences have overwhelming influence on the way we evaluate things. There has to be some degree of conflict of interest, because you favor things because I understand things because my experiences, my mentors, or the way I process things. So objectivity, you could be, despite all your conflicts could have the least degree of infringement on your objectivity. But ultimately, as a human being, we are a sum total of what we experience in our lives, our education, our environment, our mentors. There's so many variables which determine who we are when we arrive at a certain point in life. So we speak about objectivity. Objective does mean absolute. The only one who's objective on an absolute level is God, because God influences. God is not influenced. God is pre-existent existence. He is perfect on the absolute level, so his understanding is absolute, and whatever may be. He determined whatever may be. What is the objective of the human being? To be challenged, and if you meet the challenge, you advance yourself. You fill in the void, and you're able to achieve perfection. What is the meaning of that perfection? Does perfection mean absolute perfection? Or is perfect the one who's perfect absolutely on an absolute level? That's on God himself. So meaning, when we seek achieve perfection, means relative to what you weren't before, and meaning to meet your capacity. Whatever your potential is, now you've achieved perfection. Of course, you can't be more than you're meant to be. But in the total picture, you're not perfect on an absolute level. Could be compared to God, you're not perfect. You're far from perfect. Has no relevance to perfection. And he gives the example. An angel, as great as an angel is, he's not perfect. He's perfect in the capacity that he was created to function. In that capacity, he functions as he's meant to function, to its full extent. But is he perfect in terms of the concept of perfect, absolute? Definitely not. Because compared to God, he's not perfect. But what is the difference between a Jew and the greatest angel? We find there's a positive commandment in the Torah, Obo Tibok. We have to cleave to God. That's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to cleave to God. So the Talmud asks, if God is fire, could you cleave to fire? It's impossible. So the Gemara answers, by emulating God's ways. That's how you cleave to him. As he is merciful, you should be merciful. As he is gracious, you should be gracious. By assuming his so-called profile, which he revealed to us, the way he relates to his existence within the context of mercy and graciousness, clothing the dead, clothing the naked, burying the dead. These are his characteristics, his attributes. And he says, if you emulate my attributes, that's the way to cleave to me. So he's prescribing, how do you cleave to him? He's infinite. How do you cleave to the infinite? We're finite. How do you cleave to the infinite? He prescribes how to do it by assuming his characteristics. So now, when we cleave to him, what happens when we cleave? What are we cleaving to? We're cleaving to the absolute. When you cleave to the absolute, you become part of the absolute. You become part of an absolute system. So although we in our own right are not perfect, and we only be perfect in the context that we meet our potential, but in its own right, we're not perfect. Because perfect and absolute is only God. But if you fulfill your responsibility and you meet your objective, which is to achieve your level of perfection, now you're qualified to cleave. Once you cleave, what are you cleaving to? You're cleaving to an absolute system. God says you're cleaving to me. Who am I? I am infinite. I am absolute in the context of perfection. You're now associated and attached to a system that's absolute on a perfect level. The angel doesn't cleave to God. The angel was created as an entity unfathomable within the spiritual realm. He's perfect. His potential is not fathomable. But whatever he is, he has no relevance to what's perfect, absolute. Because his purpose is not to become part of God, only to facilitate God's will. And that's why God created the angel. That's the concept. So the Jew himself, what he's able to achieve, if he meets his level of potential, now you're worthy to cleave. If you cleave, you're part of the absolute. Now, how do you cleave? Firstly, you have to fill in the deficiency. We're created deficient. We fill in deficiency by meeting our potential within our own right, our own context. We're no longer deficient, but you're not perfect, absolute. But now that you've achieved that level of perfection within your own context, now you're qualified to cleave. Once you cleave, it's like you graft something onto something else. And once the graft becomes part of the ecology of that tree, it's part of the tree. God gives us the means to be able to cleave to him. Firstly, you have to meet a level of perfection. And you have to emulate his attributes. If you meet all those criteria, now you're part of the absolute. So not only you're perfect in your own right, like Moshe Rabbeinu, he met his potential, or every one of us, if we do meet our potential, as the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, Laws of Tshuva, we're no less than Moshe Rabbeinu. But what do we achieve when we're no less than Moshe Rabbeinu? Now we're qualified to cleave at that most advanced level. So now you're attached to the absolute perfection at the most advanced level. And therefore the Gemara tells us that Gdolim Tzadikim Yosem Al Chei Hasharis, that a tzaddik is greater than the greatest angel. Because the greatest angel, whatever he is, two reasons. Angel is an angel because God created him to be what he is. A tzaddik is only a tzaddik only due to his initiative, that he met so many challenges, and therefore he achieved that classification of tzaddik. The angel has nothing to do with achieving anything. It functions the capacity God created him. As a result of that, the tzaddik surpasses the angel. Therefore, the angel doesn't cleave to God. The tzaddik, the Jew was created initially that if you succeed and you achieve, now you're qualified to attach, to mesh with God. And once you mesh with God, you become part of that absolute perfect system, and you become part of the infinite because you're attached to the infinite. That's the concept. On Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we say a certain part of the liturgy is Nisan Tokef. And we speak about the awesomeness of the Day of Judgment. How the angels in heaven tremble from God's judgment. and how they rush back and forth and they stand in trepidation. Why? Because God is evaluating as one counts sheep when it goes through that narrow passage. That's where God looks at each one of us and evaluates us and scrutinizes us. That's the day of judgment. It's a level of exactness which we tremble, we fear. It says the angels. So what do we say that for? Because that's to give us a semblance of understanding of how solemn that day is, that we have to relate and have a mindset to invest every bit of our emotion and intellect to appreciate what the day is. But do we tremble the way the angels tremble? They tremble because it's the day of judgment. But it's this whole different reality. An angel does not have the capacity to go beyond where the angel's at. We can make corrections. The trembling is only to facilitate the ability to make the correction. A person has relevance to tshuva. God says, I created an entity. It's a mechanism that despite the deficiency which comes about due to your own failing, your own bad choice, because you were somehow hoodwinked by the evil inclination, and you did the wrong thing. But if you appreciate how wrong it is, you can make the correction. But when do we make corrections? If we appreciate the negative, if you appreciate the negative, you want to release that negative. You want to disassociate with the negative. So by understanding the consequence and the ramification of that negative, then you do whatever you can to be focused to achieve what you're supposed to achieve. Only the human being or the Jew, understanding, knowing that he has the ability to extricate himself from that, and not only extricate himself, even advance himself, because if you do the right thing and you appreciate what you're supposed to do, after you do tshuva, you're even beyond where you were before you did tshuva, before you even sinned, because due to your appreciation of your wrong, now you've catapulted to another level. That's the human being, that's the Jew. The angel, there's no catapulting. He just sees you're in a bind. God is judging mankind. Nothing goes unseen by God. As we say, there's no forgetfulness before the heavenly throne. Every nuance of our behavior is on record, and we're accountable for it. But even though we're accountable for it, but we're able to correct the record and actually moving from the record as if it was never on the record. And that could be replaced with something which is beyond the negative that was on the record. Because we understand, if you appreciate it, what the value of correction is and what the value of achievement is. We're talking about evil. At the end of time, there's not going to be any reason why we need evil. Evil is only to facilitate and create the context of challenge. That's what it is. Once the days of challenge are over, there's no need for evil any longer. There's no need for angels any longer. Good. The evil inclination is a force in the spiritual realm. And it creates distortions of truth. But it was created for that. But what's the value of that? The value of that is to give us the ability to make choices. Because everything, if it's absolutely clear what's right and what's wrong, it's not a challenge. You naturally gravitate toward the right. You stay away from the negative. So it creates a level of distortion. You have to overtly take an initiative to take control. That initiative is called you've acted on your choice. And because it's due to you, it's attributed to you. Therefore, you're reflecting God's characteristic that everything is attributed to God himself. That's the understanding. But once that objective is complete, at the end of time, where there's no reason for the challenge any longer, longer, it's post-challenge time, that force of evil is no longer necessary. And therefore it says at the end of time, what's going to happen? When Mashiach comes, God will be the king over all existence. He will be one, and his name will be one. Nobody will ever question the absoluteness of God. Why? Today people question it. Because then there's no longer the entity called distortion, which is the evil or the evil inclination. And all this impurity only exists only to create the atmosphere of to be able to correct, to meet challenges, to assume responsibility. You know, it's interesting. In yesterday's 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, we speak about there were 10 generations from Adam to Noach. And although they defied God, they angered God, God was patient for 10 generations. It tells us the degree of patience and mercy, unlimited mercy God had. Finally, by the 10th generation, he brought the flood waters and destroyed the world. That happened. Time of Noach. From Noach to Avram, again, the 10 generations. And again, these 10 generations followed the behavior of the initial 10 generations. They angered God. They enraged God. God was patient. And Avram comes, the Kibel Schar Keneget Kulam. So it's interesting. So Chaim Volozhin makes a point. It says the 10 generations from Noach to Abraham. Avram is referred to just as Abraham. Now it says, and God, these 10 generations enraged God. They angered him to show us to what degree he was patient. And Avram Avinu received reward for all 10 generations. All of a sudden now, he's referred to not only as Avram Avinu, Avram, our patriarch. Why does he go from Avram, seemingly the ordinary citizen, to Avram, our patriarch? When we speak about he received reward of all the 10 generations that failed. Why? So Rabbeinu Yonah, who's one of the early commentators on Pirkei Avos, writes, why was the world destroyed in the time of Noach? If the people from the 10 generations from Noach to Avram failed as seriously, maybe even more, because they were aware that there was a great flood. So they have what to draw from. And despite that, they turned their backs. They're even more culpable. So why did God destroy the world after 10 generations from Noach to Avram? But he didn't. And why is it important for us to know that Avram received reward that was meant to be for those 10 generations? He received all that reward. Why did he receive that reward? First of all, why is that important for us to know? And in this context, why is it important for us to know? What's the reason? So Rabbeinu Yonah explains it this way. God created the world with an objective. If that objective is not addressed or met, God's wasting his time. So God should actually cease willing existence. But if that objective is addressed and is met, creation has value. The first 10 generations from Adam to Noach, from Adam to Noach, they failed, and the minimal level of objective that was meant to be achieved was not achieved. Not by those 10 generations. And Noach did not pick up the slack, as they say, to compensate where they failed. Because Noach was not at that level. So what happened? The world was destroyed. Who remained? Noach, in his own right as an individual citizen, he remained because in terms of what he was supposed to achieve, he achieved. He found special charm, favor in God's eyes. But for the rest of the world, nobody picked up that slack. What they were meant to achieve, nobody achieved. If that's the case, the world comes to an end. This is the flood waters. The world was destroyed. Avram was so great, what he was able to achieve, that he was able to meet the objective of all 10 generations. The 10 generations were supposed to achieve a certain level of spirituality. They turned their backs on it. Avram, in his short life, he was able to achieve what they should have achieved in 10 generations. So because he met the basic objective quotient of what was meant to be achieved in perfection, that's why the world wasn't destroyed. If that's the case, he received reward versus all those 10 generations. So who is the father of mankind, so to say? Before he was Avram, we're talking about how many generations from Noach to Avram? But why does the world continue? Because he's Avram Avinu. Why is he Avinu? Why is he the founding father of that chosen people who ultimately will stand at Sinai? Because the world exists only because of him. Only because of him. He's not the father of mankind. Adam was the father of mankind. Avram is the father of the Jewish people. Therefore, because he's the, but why is he the father of Jewish people? Why is he so special? Why was he the so-called the domicile for God's presence? He was the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. Because he picked up the slack. The world was not destroyed only because he filled in the gap of the 10 generations and he achieved what they were meant to achieve. That's why the world wasn't destroyed, and that's why he's identified not as Avram, the individual citizen, rather Avinu, just as a father is the basis for all the future generations. Avram is responsible for the world, and the world is there only due to him. Therefore, his progeny are the equivalent of all existence. And they were chosen to be the chosen people because they are the descendants of the patriarchs for that reason. We find that when Avram was 99 years old and Sarah was 10 years, his wife was 10 years younger than he was. She was 89. God sends 3 angels in human form. What is exactly is their agency? Avram was just circumcised. A man circumcised at the age of 99 is not simple. He needs an immediate recovery. So there's an archangel called Raphael, the angel. He's the angel who's created for healing. Then he was created, even today, he's the angel of healing. And then there was an angel that was created to destroy evil. That's Gabriel, the archangel. Gabriel is called the angel of fire. Fire is the attribute of justice. He was created, and he was the one who destroyed Sodom. And there was an angel that was created to inform Sarah, our matriarch, that she was going to conceive and be the mother of the future patriarch of the Jewish people. So these angels were created specifically for each one of the agencies, whether it's healing, whether it's destroying evil, or it's to inform something which is very significant for the spirituality of the world. That's Michael. Michael is the archangel. These angels, their agency continues till the end of time. They exist. Other angels that are created only for that particular moment, they exist and they don't exist any longer. That's what it is. So an angel is only created for its agency. If there's no longer a need for that agency, you shut down the agency. That's the concept of angel. An angel is a spiritual being that was created to carry out God's agency. Once the agency is completed, there's no reason why that agent exists any longer, so it ceases to be. Evil is only for the sake of challenge. There's an angel called the angel, which is the angel of death, what we call the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death. The evil inclination, it's all part of the same thing. The reason why a person dies is due to sin. But once man no longer dies, and man is no longer challenged, and there's no basis for sin any longer, he has no value, he has no purpose. His agency has come to an end. Once his agency comes to an end, that force doesn't exist any longer. So when we speak about evil coming to an end at the end of time, it's not it ran out of power. God ceases to will it because it has no value any longer. Because the objective that it was meant to achieve is over. Now we're ready for the day of reckoning. Once the day of reckoning happens, and man is no longer challenged, he has no purpose. Therefore, at the end of time, the world will recognize that God is the omnipotent being and nothing exists outside of God for that reason. Everything will be clear on the absolute level. Because it's no longer a time of choice. It's a time now to evaluate the past, to go forward. Are you part of eternity or you're not part of eternity? That's the concept. I'll give you an example. You have the Space Challenger. So you need extra force that when that is launched, it has to go out of the Earth's atmosphere. To break through the Earth's atmosphere, you know what you need? They're called booster rockets. When those rockets ignite and they boost it, that it could go out of the Earth's atmosphere, what happens to them? They fall away because they no longer have a value. Their value is only to boost the rocket to go beyond. But once they fulfill that purpose, regardless how much they cost, because the objective is that it should go beyond the Earth's atmosphere. But you can't break through unless you have the booster rocket. You can't arrive unless you're challenged. But once that day of challenge is over, that power which challenges, it's fulfilled its purpose. It falls away. It goes to the scrap heap or it disintegrates. Has nothing, no value any longer. If you remember in the 50s, in the Hudson River, sure Larry remembers it. Alan, I'm not sure from Jericho you were able to see it, but if you drove past the Hudson River, you saw battleships just parked in the Hudson River, and they were anchored there. Eventually, they all were scrapped. They were all turned into scrap. On 57th Street, what you have there, the aircraft carrier, somebody bought it and turned it into a museum. Otherwise, it would have been turned to scrap. These frigates and these battleships were essential during the war. They couldn't have won the war. We needed a navy. We needed those ships. Once the ships became obsolete for many reasons, we are no longer at war. They weren't sophisticated enough to meet the new level of battle. What were they? They were parked, waiting to be scrapped, and they were scrapped. Today, there's no trace of what they were at one time. So people who grew up there, they saw they had an understanding what the war was fought with. And it was something which was interesting to see. But once it has no value, today, a ship, you can have a battleship. If it's torpedoed, what happens? It's irrelevant how big that ship was, how powerful it was. It's torpedoed. It goes down. It's as if it never existed. Doesn't exist. There's no trace of the existence or the people on that ship. They're gone forever. This is even more than that. There, at least, it exists at the bottom of the sea. Here, it doesn't exist. Because it only exists because God wills its existence. Once he ceases willing its existence, it's like pre-existence, as if it never existed.
Rabbi, when people are
After a person lives his life, there's an evaluation of his record and there's a judgment given. How is this man classified? Does he go in the good column or the bad column? And even if he goes in the good column, if he's not perfect enough, he needs some refining, and only then do they allow him to enter into the world to come. Tzaddik is what? If the majority of his choices were positive, he fits into the classification of tzaddik. If the majority of his actions were negative, he doesn't fit into the good column. He goes into the bad column. Even if he goes in the bad column, it doesn't mean to say ultimately he won't be able to achieve a level of worthiness if he did some good in his life to enter into the world to come. But when he enters into the world to come, it'll be at a very minimal level, at an inferior level. The one who's the tzaddik, after he's purged of, because nobody's perfect, if when he passes away, he still has some of that imperfection, he has to be purged. Once he's purged because of the dimension of achievement is so outstanding, he goes into the advanced level of the world to come. At the time a person passes away, every mitzvah we do, we generate a positive energy. That's what a mitzvah does. And the mitzvah and the energy that generates is based on what did you infuse in the mitzvah? Did you do it for the sake of God? Did you do it with love? Did you do it with reverence? Did you do it by rote? It generates some level, but qualitatively, that will determine the intensity of that angel who's going to testify on your behalf. When a person sins, it generates a negative energy. Was it inadvertent? Was it due that you were somehow entrapped? Was it due to defiance? That will determine the degree of negative energy. And the angel that's created due to that energy, that angel will testify for you or against you. It'll be either a defense or it'll be a prosecuting angel. These are the angels. The tribunal makes an assessment, hearing the prosecutor, hearing the negative and hearing the positive. What's this person's classification? They give a verdict. Tzaddik, that's one verdict. Another, Russia. But once the person is purged, that negative force no longer exists. Of course, that negative force, its value is only for the sake of that's a result of what you did wrong. But once that's purged from the person and he's refined sufficiently to go in the world to come, that negative force doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's gone forever. And the positive force, which is an enrichment of the person's neshama, that continues forever. That's part of you forever. That's what happens. But at the end of time, where there's no longer, the world will exist till the year 6000, at that moment, there's no evil. Evil has no relevance anymore. Evil means we're talking about the angel which entraps you, which seduces you. The moment of seduction is over. The years of challenge are over. It has nothing to do with prosecuting angels. Prosecuting angels is for the past. But the seduction, there's no point of seducing any longer. Of course, there's no longer a moment of choice. Because whatever you've chosen, the game is over. Once the game is over, let's say Al could appreciate baseball because his sons are pitchers. If nobody plays baseball, what do you do with all the baseball equipment? There's no point. What do you do with the ball fields? You turn in some kind of other field. It's no longer a baseball field. It may be a place you just stroll today. Same thing. Once that time comes, the time of challenge is over. Once there's no challenge, there's no point for seduction. So whatever force creates seduction, that force comes to an end.
So Rabbi,
That's the understanding.
once Mashiach comes, there should be death anymore, right?